So I'd like to welcome them, all the individuals testifying or presenting, to come up to the table. Madam Commissioner, good to see you.
Thank you very much. It's good
Yeah.
to see you too.
Good.
Thank you for welcoming us.
Yeah, no worries. Is that everybody? I know you got a lot.
I think so. I think
All
this
right.
is the talking team.
Okay, well, floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Members of the committee, it's nice to present to you today and get to know you a little bit. I wanted to make sure that we brought a large number of our folks so that you're able to put names to faces and you know who's available at any given point in time to assist you and your constituents with their issues. So not everybody's going to speak today, but I will, with your permission, introduce the folks that I have with me, and then we'll jump into the presentation. Thank you. So my name is Kathleen Borain. I serve as the Maryland Insurance Commissioner. With me today is my Chief of Staff, Alex Borkowski, who's in the back, Van Dorsey, who is our Principal Counsel from the Office of the Attorney General, Mary Quay, who's the Associate Commissioner for Market Conduct and Regulation, Robert Barron, who is our Associate Commissioner for Property and Casualty, Joy Hatchett, who many of you know, who's the Associate Commissioner for Consumer Education and Advocacy, Lynn Beckner, who is our Associate Commissioner for Financial Regulation, Andrew Tress, who's our Director of Government Relations, and Jamie Sexton, who's the Director of Health Insurance Regulatory Affairs and National Partnerships. And even though you don't address health insurance issues per se, your constituents have health insurance issues from time to time. So we want to make sure that you know who to get to for the sake of your constituents. So with that, we'll jump into our presentation. So what is the Maryland Insurance Administration? Well, we're the state agency that's charged with the regulation of Maryland's $46 billion insurance industry. Our core mission is to protect the rights and the interests of consumers. We do that by making sure that we have a strong and vibrant market. We enforce the insurance laws that you pass, make sure that companies comply with their regulatory requirements, and we offer consumer education and assistance. We are structured as an independent unit of state government. What that means is that we are specially funded through the collection of fees and assessments on the insurance industry, and we distribute revenue to the general fund primarily in the form of premium taxes and fines that we impose against companies that don't follow our rules. Next slide. So here are our core regulatory functions. I'm not going to read them for you. You can do that at your leisure. But most important on this slide, these slides, are the fact that we license companies and professionals, that we conduct market conduct examinations to make sure that companies are complying, that we review, and with respect to some, not all, lines of business, we approve rates, and we approve all policy and contract forms. We investigate insurance fraud. Next slide. And very importantly, we investigate consumer complaints. We also have a robust consumer education and advocacy unit that works with and engages with consumers, and Joy Hatchett will talk in more detail about that later. The last bullet point is something I very much want to emphasize, which is that we're here to provide technical assistance and guidance to you as the policymakers, to you, to the governor, to other agencies where you have questions, issues, concerns about insurance, you want to get information, or you have ideas, and you want to understand what might be the practical impact or the economic consequences. So my team is filled with actuaries and lawyers and professionals who are here to provide you with that kind of background and information when you choose to take advantage of it, but we're here at your disposal. Slide. The other thing I wanted to do was familiarize you with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. That's the U.S. standard setting body, which is comprised of all of the chief insurance regulators from all of the states and the territories. It's an important organization because part of it is information sharing, but some of those standards that get set are standards that have been incorporated into our law by definition. So if the NAIC adopts a particular position, usually with regard to financial oversight, it becomes the law of the state of Maryland. We have a very robust role at the NAIC. Maryland has always been a real participant. Currently, and I don't have everything here, but for things that I think would interest this committee, I chair the Innovation, Cybersecurity, and Technology Committee, which the kind of our key areas of interest right now and focus are on algorithmic bias and developing regulatory guidance for responsible AI use by the insurance industry. Data privacy, obviously, we're working on revising the models and consolidating those models so that we have a more robust and focused privacy protection model for states to adopt. And then, of course, cybersecurity, both as a line of business and making sure that protection gaps are being addressed, but also, of course, making sure that the industry itself is secure in its collection and use of data. Maryland passed a cybersecurity law last year that was off of the model that had been adopted by the NAIC. We are a member of the International Insurance Relations Committee, and in that regard, I sit as part of Team USA on the U.S. Department of Treasury's insurance dialogue, along with FIO and FSOC and the state of Iowa. We also chair a number of other committees. I won't read all of this, but the kinds of things that you guys will be interested in that we do in particular have to do with climate and the impact of climate risk on the solvency of insurance companies, and obviously the work that we are doing with the Special Committee on Race and Insurance, which leads back to our algorithmic bias work. Next slide. So the MIA is staffed by a really seasoned group of people. I mean, our associate commissioners, many of them have been here for 15, 20 years, so they have great knowledge and experience and perspective, which is at your disposal. Our organization, and within the Office of the Commission, you'll have our government relations and our communications, our Office of Hearings, but for your purposes, the operational divisions are laid out here: consumer education, finance, life and health, property and casualty, market regulation, and then our chief actuaries. We also have an excellent, and have always had an excellent working relationship with the Office of the Attorney General. I spent 5 years as the principal counsel of the MIA under Joe Curran at the end of the Glendenning administration through the beginning of the O'Malley administration. I am delighted that my deputy became the principal counsel and is still there. So Van Dorsey, in fact, Van and I were just laughing because we're in 5 meetings together tomorrow. So they are and have always been an integral part of what the MIA does, and we trust them and rely on them for their advice and for their judgment. So who do we regulate? Well, here's sort of a list. We regulate, obviously, insurance companies, but we regulate lots of other actors within the insurance sector, and that includes, producers, and it includes third-party administrators, for example. I've provided you with an org chart of the senior leadership of the MIA so that, again, you know what the names are if you ever need to get in touch with us. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Associate Commissioner Robert Barron, who heads our P&C unit.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be in front of the House Economics Matters Committee again. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Robert Barron, and it's my honor to serve as the Associate Commissioner for the Property and Casualty Division at the Insurance Administration, where I have worked for the past 23 years. Next slide. No, actually, that's the right side. Sorry about that. So the Property and Casualty Division is responsible for regulating the insurance sector, and this encompasses a wide range of policy types, like homeowners, automobile, commercial insurance for all types of businesses, workers' compensation insurance, professional liability insurance, including medical malpractice, and many, many others. The division consists of 2 core teams, the Rates and Forms Review Unit and the Consumer Complaints Unit. Both units, as Commissioner Moraine mentioned, are staffed by experienced insurance regulators and a dedicated professional support staff that enables us to carry out our mission of providing customer protection through consumer protection through fair and efficient enforcement of Maryland's insurance laws and regulations. With respect to our Rates and Forms Review Unit, it's important to understand that Maryland has a competitive property and casualty marketplace. There are about 125 different insurers that write homeowners insurance in the state, and about 145 insurers that write automobile insurance in the state. These insurers provide a wide range of products, coverage options, and prices to Maryland's insurance consumers. Under existing law, property insurance insurers must file their policy forms and endorsements with us for review and for our prior approval before they can offer those policies for sale in the state. This ensures that the content of these insurance contracts, the coverages and the policy language are fully compliant with Maryland's legal requirements. These insurers are also required to file their rates and rating rules with us for our review. And so, the rates, that's, the basic component of what people pay. The rating rules are how they apply those rates, and they have to be filed with us for review. Under Maryland's existing file and use rating statutes for a competitive market, insurers do not need to obtain, in most lines of business, this includes the lines that your constituents are frequently most concerned with, home and auto, for example. They don't need to obtain our prior approval to implement rate changes. In other words, under Maryland law, rates are set by the competitive market, not by the state, not by the Insurance Administration. And to be clear, property and casualty insurers are allowed to file rate changes with us and implement them immediately. That said, we do review all rate filings in order to ensure that rates are not inadequate, excessive, or unfairly discriminatory. And each of those three prongs is super important. It's important that rates are not inadequate, obviously, so that insurers have what they need to have in order to pay claims. It's important that they not be excessive. In other words, they shouldn't be more than is necessary to provide the coverage that's provided, and they shouldn't, of course, be unfairly discriminatory. However, we can't declare that a filed rate is excessive unless we first determine through a hearing that there is not a competitive market for that line of business in the state. Or we determine that the actuarial support for the filed rate is not sound. So important to understand the ramifications of a competitive market. In addition to our regulatory oversight of these lines of business in the admitted insurance market, the Insurance Administration has an oversight role in three what we call residual markets that are established in the Annotated Code of Maryland by the General Assembly. So these would be the Joint Insurance Administration, often called the JIA, for essential property insurance, the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, also known as MAIF or Maryland Auto, for motor vehicle liability insurance, and the Chesapeake Employers Insurance Company in the workers' compensation line of business. These are the markets of last resort for Marylanders who can't obtain that kind of coverage on their own in the standard market, usually due to claim history. With respect to the JIA and MAIF, Maryland law has a statutorily imposed funding mechanism that acts as a backstop to ensure that both the JIA and MAIF have the resources they need to meet operational and claim obligations. Existing law provides that the Commissioner must approve the JIA's rate structure even if it's not a competitive rate with the standard market. And the reason for that is that the JIA has this statutorily created funding mechanism through the assessments of the admitted market. With respect to MAIF, when reviewing MAIF's rates, and MAIF is also permitted to use our file and use rating laws, the Commissioner must consider MAIF's statutory mission as the insurer of last resort in the state when reviewing MAIF's rate filings. In Maryland, workers' compensation rates are derived from the loss costs filed annually by our authorized rating organization, the National Council for Compensation Insurance, or NCCI. Chesapeake Employers Insurance Company now functions, as of the first of this year, they now function as both our market of last resort and as a full-fledged member company of NCCI. Rate filings by all workers' compensation insurers are subject to our review and prior approval. So not like the file and use rates in the personal lines of insurance I mentioned earlier, but workers' compensation rates have to be reviewed by us and approved by us prior to use by workers' compensation insurers. And there are a couple of other lines of business that are a prior approval also. Healthcare professional liability, I mentioned earlier, medical malpractice, right? And surety, fidelity, and title insurance lines of business are subject to prior approval rating rules. So with respect to our second core team, the Consumer Complaints Unit, our team receives about 5,000 formal complaints each year from your respective constituencies. In 2022, the Consumer Complaints team helped consumers recover over $3.7 million in the form of premium refunds and claim payments. Next slide. Some of the most common consumer complaint types are shown on this slide. In complaints involving premium increases or coverage termination notices, the Consumer Complaints team is often successful in obtaining positive outcomes in the form of premium relief or coverage continuation for policyholders. And in claim complaint scenarios, our investigations ensure that insurance companies honor their contractual obligations and do not act arbitrarily, capriciously, or otherwise in violation of Maryland's insurance laws and regulations, including the Unfair Claims Settlement Practices Act. I'm proud to report that that we conduct consumer satisfaction surveys of all complaints, so all 5,000 of them each year. And our investigators are frequently complimented on the quality of service they provide, even in situations where the consumer's preferred result may not have been obtained. We often get thank you notes from complainants because of the role that we've played and the effort that we've made. So before I turn things back over to the Commissioner to highlight some of the current property and casualty topics that may cross your radar, I just want to restate something the Commissioner said a few moments ago, which is that the Property and Casualty Division is here not only to address the concerns of your constituents, but also to act as a resource for you, your staff members as well. We're here to provide our subject matter expertise on all things property and casualty related, from the most routine matters to the most complex. You can always reach out to me or any of my staff. We're highly visible on our website through email. Any way you need to contact us, send up smoke signals if you must. We're here to help. And with that, I'll say next slide and turn it back over to Commissioner Bahrain.
So just briefly, and we don't need to go through these here, but I just want to highlight for you the kinds of important P&C policy issues that we think will be of interest to you and maybe on your radar screen through this session and going forward. Obviously, cannabis, and one of the biggest issues with cannabis is the availability of coverage for lawful cannabis business and really the Bank Safety Act that has been pending in Congress for a while and still hasn't made it through. We are actively engaged with our fellow regulators in other states, particularly Alaska and Colorado, that have addressed many of these coverage issues and enabling cannabis business to purchase using U.S. banks and national banks to receive claim payments and make premium payments. And so we're looking at strategies there that we'll be able to present to you as you move forward with cannabis legislation. On climate issues, Maryland is highly engaged both from a solvency standpoint, but also looking at coverage gaps and what that means, also resiliency and mitigation efforts and solvency impacts. It's important, and many insurance companies are investing in infrastructure in order to promote resiliency and mitigation because it makes sense to them from an overall claims standpoint. And so part of what we're doing is working with other state agencies to bring some of those grant dollars and bring some of those investment dollars to the state of Maryland and see much more robust participation in Maryland on those issues. And then finally, issues around algorithmic bias, proxy discrimination, disparate outcomes, and redlining, and how you identify redlining in this kind of world, right, where things are being done through algorithms that are driving decision-making. So we are at the heart of those efforts at the NAIC level, and we're bringing that expertise to Maryland as well. So if, to the extent that you have issues or questions or concerns about what we're doing and what that means, we are very happy to be a resource. And now let me turn it over to you, Mary.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mary Quay. I'm the Associate Commissioner for Market Regulation and Professional Licensing, and I will talk about some of the units that are in that division. Market conduct looks at general business practices of an insurer. And general business practices means that we're looking at the picture overall, not just at one complaint, although we can also look at things that we learn of through a complaint. And the continuum of market conduct actions can be anything from a phone call to discuss issues to a full market conduct examination. And a market conduct exam usually involves selecting the areas we want to look at and then requiring the carrier to give us samples that are randomly selected that we choose. An investigation may arise from a complaint, but it focuses on one area where we already know that there is an issue. Next slide, please. Companies are selected for investigation or examination based on various factors. There may be a self-report from a company, a complaint that points to a problem, or our market analysis unit may find that a company has red flags, and market analysis looks at national data to see if there are any problems that have been identified in other states or if they're an outlier in some ways. If a violation is found, the company will be required to make restitution to consumers, prepare a corrective action plan, and a monetary penalty will be assessed as appropriate. Next slide. This slide summarizes a recent market conduct exam. We looked at an auto insurance company, and this is the type of exam where we decide what we're looking at and take samples from the company. Maryland law limits how credit history can be used for rating, and that is one of the things we looked at here. And the slide summarizes our findings. Next slide. This was an investigation that arose from a complaint. Late fees have to be part of the filed rates that Robert talked about, and the company had made an error in the filings and omitted a late fee. So in this case, we didn't have to take random samples because we knew what we were looking for and what the problem was. And so we required the company to make refunds of the fees to the policyholders and to pay a penalty. The refunds to individuals were small, but when taken over a large number of years and a large number of people, it came to over $6 million in restitution to Maryland consumers. Next slide. This slide looks at an exam of a title insurer. And with title, it's not as directly looking at consumer claims and issues. We are looking at whether they have the right notices and whether they are using the right kinds of title producers with all of the paperwork that they need, such as properly appointing the producers. Next slide. This was an investigation that came from a company that came to the MIA and reported that they had found issues with their rating. Again, this is car insurance, and it involves credit. Credit history, if someone does not have a credit history when the company looks for it, that cannot be a factor that the company uses. They have to be neutral as to that. And in this case, the company was using the fact that there was no credit history in its rating. And when they found that, they reported that to the MIA. We supervised how they made restitution. The restitution with interest was around $4 million. And so that is something we will be following up on to verify that everything is now ready to be closed. Next slide. So cybersecurity, a bill was passed last session that is now being implemented. So that is a large topic for us. And the commissioner already discussed the issues of algorithmic bias and redlining. Next slide, please. Okay, the other piece is professional licensing. And the term producer includes insurance agents and brokers. Producer licensing reviews applications from insurance producers and other insurance professionals, such as third-party administrators, to be licensed. The unit works with other units in the MIA to conduct background checks and a vendor to administer exams to candidates and approve continuing education classes. Next slide. Title producers are licensed by the MIA to sell title insurance. However, as part of that, they conduct real estate settlements. And the MIA oversees their conduct to ensure that they handle funds correctly and follow applicable laws, including federal laws. If your constituent has a complaint about a title producer who misused funds from a settlement or failed to file a deed, then you can send the complaint to the MIA. The MIA will determine if the producer followed the law and take the appropriate action, including requiring restitution or revoking a license to prevent further consumer harm. Thank you.
So I'm going to pretend to be Joe Smith, who is our acting associate commissioner for the Fraud and Enforcement Unit. In a nutshell, what fraud does is what it sounds like. It investigates instances of fraud, whether it's civil fraud or criminal fraud. With respect to criminal fraud, we work very closely with the Attorney General's office and their criminal division. We also work with state's attorneys and with the federal government to refer instances of, criminal activity. With respect to civil fraud, that's more in line with what we do generally as enforcement in circumstances where either false claims have been made or circumstances where someone is deceiving consumers about what they can or cannot do. The enforcement unit focuses primarily on our licensees who are professional licensees, so agents and brokers, et cetera, and assuring that if there are instances where a producer or another professional is violating their standards and their licensing standards, that we take action to protect consumers from those kinds of activities. We also review, every company is supposed to have a fraud plan, which we review and make sure that they're being followed. Next slide. I would say we work very, very closely with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners and the National Insurance Crime Bureau. One of the most important things we do are look for fraud schemes across companies, and sort of the areas that we're super focused on right now, twofold, are one, false marketing, particularly of Medicare Advantage products. That is a trend that's happening across the country, but whether it's related to that particular product line or others, it's looking at schemes across the country to defraud citizens. And then the other thing that we're very, very focused on is protecting consumers from folks who are the storm chasers or the people that show up after a disaster and they are going to promise the universe and they're going to take care of everything, and they've got a public adjuster who may or may not be associated with them, or they're not a public adjuster and they're pretending to be a public adjuster. So we've been very vigilant and come down very hard in the last couple of years about that. I think that the Joy and the Baltimore City Fire Chief have become best friends on that issue, because that is a circumstance where people just come and swarm, and so they have us on speed dial so that we can put people on the ground pretty quickly to help consumers understand who really they can trust for help. So that's a sort of a summary of what our insurance fraud unit does. But if you see instances or you're concerned about those kinds of practices, again, please reach out. Lynn?
Hello, I'm Lynn Beckner. I'm the Associate Commissioner of Financial Regulation Division. The Financial Regulation Division is responsible for the financial regulation of domestic and foreign insurance companies in Maryland. This includes the examination and financial analysis of licensed companies and companies seeking a license to operate in Maryland. The examinations and analyses are conducted to ensure that companies are solvent and are in compliance with Maryland's insurance laws and regulations. Next slide, please. We perform risk-focused financial examinations of each domestic company at least once every 5 years. The results of the financial examinations are documented in reports posted on our website. We also perform ongoing financial analyses, which include reviewing yearly and quarterly financial statements and other filings, including material intercompany transactions submitted by domestic insurance companies. One of the purposes of examinations and financial analyses is to identify potential troubled companies in the early stage to prevent the need to initiate rehabilitation or liquidation proceedings. However, if proceedings are needed, the MIA initiates and oversees the process. The mission of the NAIC's accreditation program is to establish and maintain standards to promote sound financial solvency regulation. This is accomplished with uniformity of certain laws, regulations, and guidelines known as accreditation standards. Regulators use the accreditation standards to perform financial examinations and analyses on the companies domiciled in their state. The uniformity of certain laws and the accreditation standards allow Maryland to rely on another state's work with regard to foreign companies licensed in Maryland. And other states can rely on Maryland's work for the Maryland domiciled companies licensed in their states. The NAIC performs an accreditation review of each state at least once every 5 years. Yearly self-reviews are performed in the interim. Maryland's last on-site accreditation review was in 2020, and we received a 5-year accreditation status. Next slide. Entities that have an assessment mechanism by statute are the Joint Insurance Association and the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund. The Financial Regulation Division's role with regard to these entities is to review yearly and quarterly financial statement filings and to conduct periodic on-site examinations to assess the financial condition and compliance of these entities.
And now, always the star of any MIA show, Associate Commissioner Joy Hatchett.
Good afternoon, committee. Joy Hatchett, Associate Commissioner for the Consumer Education and Advocacy. And I've worked with a number of you, and for those of you that I've not had the opportunity, I look forward to working with you. So one of the primary functions of our agency is making sure that your constituents, the consumers throughout the state of Maryland, understand what their policies cover, what they don't cover, what their rights and obligations are under those policies, and how to properly shop for those policies. And so that is what my unit focuses on. And we do that in a number of ways. One of the ways that we do it is we do in-person events. Prior to COVID, we did about 550 events all over the state because the state of Maryland is more than just Baltimore and Annapolis. It's Western Maryland, it's the Eastern Shore, and it's Southern Maryland. So my team truly believes that we need to meet the people where they are. So we travel the entire state. Now, COVID sort of threw a little glitch in this, but I'm happy to say that at this point, we are back on the road, and in 2022, we did 360 some odd events. And so one of the things that I want to stress to you is if you are having an in-person event that you would like us to participate in, please let us know. And if at all possible, we will send a representative. And we go not just to conferences. You'll see us in the libraries. You'll see us at the MVAs. You'll see us at the office buildings, because truly we need to be where people already come so that they can have the opportunity to learn, because that's the key. We want to make sure that your constituents understand those policies. Insurance is difficult, and so we try to really make sure that we give them the chance to learn about those policies, and that's what we do. And so we do the in-person events, and as I said, last year we've gone back, not quite to where we were before, but I'm proud that we're getting there. But it's not just in-person events. We also do a lot of virtual events. Next slide, please. So what exactly is a virtual event? You guys have already all attended these webinars and Zoom calls. Well, we do those. And we do those on a variety of topics. And we try to do those at various times of the day. And it's just not pure insurance issues. Today at noon, we had one on 211. And I'm happy to say we almost had 200 participants on that particular virtual event, which is major. Now, sometimes we don't get as many. That's okay. If we've basically educated a few, we've done our job. So last year, we did about 180 virtual presentations. And once again, if you would like us to come into your community and offer a virtual presentation on a number of topics, just let us know, and we're happy to do that. Now, a lot of groups basically just talk. They basically will say, well, this is what you need to know. We believe that we need to listen. We need to hear from you, your constituents, community groups, and other organizations, the issues that they're having, so that we can present our information in a way that reaches everyone. So what we've done over the last couple of years is a series of listening sessions, basically giving different groups and constituencies the opportunity to tell us, well, this is a gap area, or this is something that we don't quite understand, or we would like to get this information in a different format. And we just didn't listen and just say, okay, well, that's real nice. We took what we gathered and figured out a plan on how to implement strategies based on what we heard. Next slide, please. Now, everybody learns differently. Some of us want in person. Some of us want virtual presentations. But some people like me, I'm old, I like to read. So we provide written materials. And so on our website, we have brochures on basically every insurance topic that you can think of. And some of them are long, lengthy brochures, and some of them are short consumer advisories. We also have an active social media presence. We have Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Nextdoor. Because especially for that format of Nextdoor, we have found that that's a way to really talk to and interact with communities that wouldn't necessarily come to the Maryland Insurance Administration. Because these are people that we're meeting them where they are. So that has been a great way for us to interact with the community. And also I want to point out that we also have a lot of our brochures, and we do some of our presentations in Spanish. Right now, we also have written materials in Korean. Next slide. Now, Robert talked about his formal property and casualty unit. And that's a great unit that you can come to file complaints on a multitude of things, and they go through the formal complaint process. Within my unit, I have something called a rapid response program, and it handles P&C claims issues. And what we try to do is to resolve PNC claims only, quickly. And a lot of that is going back to our primary function, educating consumers. Because sometimes it's just that the consumer doesn't understand what their policy covers and it doesn't cover, or they don't understand the claims process. So what our rapid response program does is it tries to not only work with the consumer and the insurance company to bring things to a resolution, but to explain to consumers, this is where your gap is. And if you had this coverage, if you had flood insurance, this claim would have been covered. So we try to do that educational piece as well. And in 2022, we had less than 1,000 complaints, and we were able to recover not quite $5 million. So probably the way that most of you know me is because of disaster response. If there is a disaster, a tornado, a flood, a major explosion, or anything like that, my team is the one that coordinates it's not just my team, it's the entire agency, but we coordinate that disaster response. What we try to do is either in person or virtually, and as the commissioner will tell you, when she first started talking about virtual disaster centers, I was like, not gonna work, not gonna work. It's one of the best things that we have implemented. So, but what we try to do is help people explain the process. And the last time we actually did this was right after the December weather event, where a lot of people did not have power. So we waited until like 3 or 4 days later when they did have power, and then we opened up our virtual center to assist them with their claims. And one of the advantages, I don't know how many of you will remember Isabel and La Plata, where we were on the ground. And after Isabel, we were on the ground in 13 or 14 different locations. And it was extremely difficult for us to staff all of those locations. Well, now we're able to do it virtually. And so we can all be in one place and still assist your constituents throughout the state. So it is truly the way that we can provide one-on-one service to all constituents all across the state of Maryland. And that's my last slide.
So briefly, one of the things that's been really powerful about that is that consumers don't have to go and get more material. So there's nothing more frustrating for a consumer that's had a disaster that has to, first of all, figure out the way to get to the in-person disaster center, but then they show up and they don't have what they need. Whereas if we're doing it virtually, it makes it so much easier. And version 2.0, which is rolling out, is the version where we're bringing in other state agencies, local government officials, and carriers so that it becomes a one-stop shop. So when that person goes into a breakout room, they're moved from breakout room to breakout room, so we can help them solve as many of their problems as they can without having to travel. So that's been a really important thing. And when Joy says they're everywhere, she's not kidding. You go to a farmer's market, you're going to see the MIA. It's not just the big stuff. It's, if there's a carnival or a fair in a neighborhood, Joy is going to be there. So just important to know. And when you have issues, and the idea of meeting people where they are and listening is really core to this mission. So I ask you a favor, which is that if you see places where we're not explaining things helpfully, or there are topics that we're not delving into, or we're not educating in all the ways that people need to learn, bring that to us, because our mission is to, as Joy said, educate and engage. And while we do our best, we are not perfect. And so sometimes we need to hear from particularly consumer advocacy groups on the ground where we might be missing the boat. But we'll take that and we will work with that and we'll make changes. So that's my ask of you guys. Turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Joy is a tough one to follow, so I'll be brief in these concluding slides here. Andrew Tress, Director of Government Relations here at the MIA. And just to reinforce again what some others have said, as being a resource to you all and your constituents, myself and Jamie Sexton, who was introduced earlier on, are sort of the boots on the ground here in Annapolis throughout session. So at any time you see us in the hallway or have questions, please feel free to reach out. We are a resource for you. This slide here is just sort of links and numbers and information about the complaint filing process. I won't go too much into that because Mr. Barron and Ms. Hatchett have already discussed that as well, but we wanted to provide those resources for you in the slides. This constituent update is a newsletter you'll get monthly. As public officials, you will get that monthly automatically, and it's information on the events that Joy was talking about and other resources that you'll be able to share with your constituents. This consumer email is a little bit more industry specific, and you would have to sign up for this, but again, it's another monthly newsletter. We have increased subscribers every month, and it's another great resource. Again, here's just links to additional resources on our website and just sort of terminology in the insurance world that can be very helpful. I know it was for me. And this final slide here is just additional contact information. Should you have any questions on anything, we'd be happy to address them.
All right. Thank you all so much, and Ms. Hatchett for everything you do. Madam Commissioner, I appreciate you and your entire panel. Are there any questions? Oh, we got a couple. All right, Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I just want to thank each and every one of you, especially you, Joy. The tornado that hit South County a few months back, you guys were right on the ground. I stopped over at the Southern District Police Station. You were set up, and I know it was a very confusing time for constituents. I mean, they weren't even able to go into their houses because they were structurally unsound to get the appropriate documentation that they needed. You guys were very responsive, and it really was a team effort. I mean, I called you like on your cell phone, and you and I coordinated a couple of times, and I love that. You know, I'm a cell phone. You know, I like when people reach out to me directly. So I just wanted to thank each and every one of you. I know it was a team effort, but especially you. It was fantastic, and I know the constituency appreciate it, and I know Senator Elfreth feels the same way, and County Executive Pittman feels the same way, but on behalf of all of them, and I'm sure you're going to see Senator Elfreth over there, but thank you very, very much for your timely and very, very good response, so thank you.
Delegate Walfo.
Is this thing on? Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And it sounds like you guys are doing great work on behalf of the people of Maryland. So thank you guys for all that you guys are doing for our consumers. Three really quick questions. The first, you talked about algorithmic bias, right? That's pretty broad. Does that include digital redlining in your definition, one? And then two, is there anything specific under that scope that Marylanders are really facing at this time?
So by algorithmic bias, to be specific, we are focused on the use of big data AI in order to drive decision-making by insurance companies. So what is the data that they're using? How are they analyzing that data? What are the algorithms that they're developing with respect to that data? How are they testing those algorithms and validating them and looking for, because as you know, of course, that algorithmic process can actually emphasize and, you know, make bias in the data much more significant.
Right.
And then what ultimately are the impacts of that? So within that, I'm not sure what you mean by digital redlining, but if what you mean by digital redlining is utilizing certain automated decision-making, which has the impact of excluding folks, whether it's territorially or otherwise, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
We are very much aware of that problem, and we are evaluating certain practices right now.
Yeah, and you kind of answered my third question, which was, this is all in relation to insurance, right? I was a bit confused as to what MIA had to do with cybersecurity and artificial intelligence, but you're saying this is all in relation to insurance, correct?
And the whole insurance industry. So
Got it.
we're typically the most focused, of course, on what insurance companies do. But insurance companies are not the only people that we have to focus on. So, for example, one of the areas that my H committee is looking at, and I run the algorithmic bias project for the National Association. And one of the areas that we're looking at are third-party vendors who may or may not be our licensees, but how is that data being, or lead generators? So what are the demographics of the person that gets that little pop-up to suggest that they might want to purchase a product? So we're looking at all of those areas, and as that evolves and develops, then we're bringing that to Maryland. And as we at the NAIC this year will prepare an interpretive bulletin that looks at our expectations of responsible AI use by insurance companies in their decision-making, and I expect that we're on rapid track to get that done this year, that we will be able then to bring that to Maryland and have that be part of our guidance.
Great, thank you so much.
Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate the thanks for the outreach. I appreciate that you're asking if we have any ideas of where everywhere I go, your people are there. So I don't have any more ideas. And we all go to a lot of these events. So doing great work, and we'll be in touch. So thanks for that. I want to follow up on the issues around bias. You probably know that we get I don't think it's algorithmic bias, but this issue of redlining and essentially the structures, economic structures that reinforce and perpetuate a wealth gap, racial wealth gap specifically. And the issue that comes in front of us a lot is this question of what should usually auto insurance, but potentially home insurance companies be allowed to use in developing the rates. And what we repeatedly hear from the companies is that things like credit scores, which are in fact statistically correlated with race, and things like zip codes that are statistically correlated with race, and other economic factors that are statistically correlated with race, are legitimate for them to use because you haven't determined that they're discriminatory when they bring you their rates. And I think that it is a cyclical argument because you don't determine that they're discriminatory because we haven't told you that we find them to be discriminatory. But I think that until we're able to sort of crack this nut around all the places that the racial wealth gap shows up, and then all the places that we allow those same data points to be used to perpetuate the racial wealth gap, we're never going to get to ending that racial wealth gap. And so I wonder if you can speak a little bit to, like, do you have the ability to look, for example, at credit scores, which you mentioned in your presentation, and say, we can see that they're correlated to race, and therefore we determine that they shouldn't be used, even if they're also correlated to other things related to claims. Do you have the ability to do that? We have to direct you to do that? Is that correct? Am I understanding that right? I'm trying to figure out how we get at this issue, and it kind of ends up being a cyclical conversation.
So on credit in particular, I'll answer that question, then I'm going to give you some buckets that I think will help guide your thoughts and in your actions with respect to this. So with credit in particular, there is a law that specifically talks about how credit can be used, and so we follow that law. So I cannot independently of that law just decide that your law is wrong and that I'm going to do something else because I think it's discriminatory, because the legislature has had that discussion and came up with and developed an approach to credit by statute. And we enforce the laws, and so I can't override that legislative enactment. But what I'm going to suggest to you is that when we think about discrimination and we think about the perpetuation of historic discrimination and economic gaps, that you think about it in three ways. The first, and people ask me all the time, you say unfair discrimination, Commissioner, is there such a thing as fair discrimination? Like, that's a hard thing to swallow, but think about it between little d and capital D. So little d means like to like. And the basic rule is that in order for an insurance company to treat this person differently than that person, with respect to rates, for example, or underwriting, for example, you have to show that they're different. So you have to identify a way in which they're different that relates to loss. And then you have to show the statistical validation that this characteristic, your driving history, is predictive of loss. And that allows you to use that characteristic. However, there are some characteristics that should never be used, whether you could statistically validate them in some data set or not. And that's discrimination with a capital D. where there are specific characteristics that are absolutely prohibited, okay? So then there's a third category, right? And you can, what's hard for all policymakers is the question that you're just opposing about territory and other areas where you can identify a characteristic, a factor, that is statistically predictive of risk, but you decide as a matter of social justice and as a matter of fundamental fairness that that's not going to be allowed, even if it's statistically relevant. That is a statutory function that is for the legislature to decide. That's what you decided about credit. You decided that credit could have a very limited use with auto and no use for homeowners. So the use of credit is prohibited in homeowners rating, and it is very limited in its use with credit. That was a policy decision by the General Assembly that this factor, however relevant and predictive it might be, should not be used for public policy reasons. And then you have the more complex area that we're all working through in a environment where we are producing and analyzing data in ways we've never been able to do before, right? And find strange correlations that have never been found before. And that is the concept of proxy discrimination, where you identify a characteristic that is predictive of loss, but might also be predictive, as you pointed out, of some other characteristic. But it's not direct. And so part of the NEIC's work on bias is helping to identify how do we find factors that are really proxies for illegal factors and then address them. Does that help, that framework help you?
A little. Can I ask one follow-up question? And then I probably am going to want to have more direct conversations with you.
We're available anytime.
I appreciate that. It does, and I would need to go back to the legislative history of why we thought it was okay to use credit scores in one context and not another. But
Well, because there are winners and losers. And if you look at the state of Washington that banned credit scoring, they were, I think, very shocked at what actually happened. Because what they thought might happen and who might benefit and who might not benefit did actually not play out the way they anticipated. So one of the things we can always help you do to some extent is figure out who ultimately are the winners and losers when you change a rating factor for any reason.
so you would have that data. If I were to say to you, if I ban this factor, can you tell me how it'll play out in terms of race or how it'll play out in terms of counties or?
We can give you parameters. We can help you develop that, and we can probably do some sort of surveys that might be able to provide some of that. We're not going to be able to get down into precise numbers, but we can give you a concept of what's likely to happen. And we've seen recently in some other states, and Washington State has had a tremendous amount of difficulty when they went through and they banned with no protections around how people could swing. So we can help you to guide your decision-making.
Okay, so I may follow up with you on that.
Yeah.
But the last question, when you say loss, what that means is not necessarily whether I got into an accident, but whether I filed a claim on that accident, right?
Yeah, ultimately, loss costs are claim payments. So without a claim, well, I shouldn't say that. Insurers count losses, but you could have an accident where you didn't damage your property or anybody else's, and that's would be considered a not at fault accident maybe, and it could still have an impact on your rate. But when you use that phrase loss or loss costs, more specifically, loss costs translate to actual claim payments.
Yeah, and I guess the thing we've struggled with here is like how much of an inherent bias might there be then against lower income people who might be more likely to file a claim on a smaller sort of fender bender because they can't afford to kind of fix it without filing a claim. The need to file the claim that leads to filing the claim then makes you a predictor of loss that then gets you in the categories of higher rates. And so this connection between driving ability, safe driving, and loss isn't necessarily as clean a connection as we might think it is when we talk about what should or shouldn't be be counted. And so I worry about the structure and how much it inherently keeps poor people poor, like all of the pieces and all the rules in the structure. So, I mean, our entire structure, but specifically insurance is what we're talking about right now. So I welcome the chance to have further conversations. This has been really helpful, and I will do it offline, but thank you.
So just a reminder to everybody, there are going to be bills. I'm sure there'll be a bill on credit history that we will have the fair hearing for that. Delegate Adams.
Jamie Sexton, now I may have walked out and missed the testimony, so if you've already answered, just refer me to that and I'll watch it later. But the question goes to, do you get complaints for healthcare insurance-related reasons? If it is true that you receive those complaints, how does someone make those complaints? And could you give me a very brief, and I mean a very brief example of what kind of complaints are top of mind for your department?
So I'm going to ask Mary Quay, who used to be the chief of the Life and Health Complaint Unit and oversees the Life and Health Market Conduct Unit, to answer that question.
Yeah, it's a narrow thing, but
Yep.
it can be brief, but thank you.
Yes, we have one unit that is dedicated to complaints about denials for medical necessity. So if you ask for a prior authorization of a surgery and it's denied, that unit can review it immediately because you haven't had the surgery yet. Or if your child is at a residential treatment center for mental health reasons and they refuse to extend the stay, or they deny a claim after the fact based on it not being medically necessary or being experimental, that unit would look at those reasons. The larger Life and Health Complaint Unit, it looks at largely claim denials, but for other reasons, such as how they were coded, whether they were excluded from coverage, but it's not medical necessity. You had coverage for 30 physical therapy visits, but you wanted 40, and that kind of thing. But also if there's a premium issue, an underwriting issue in the markets where underwriting is allowed, that kind of thing.
All right,
If you go on our website, one of the first things you'll see is file a complaint. So it's like right there and present. And that unit she's talking about, they are open 24/7, 365 days a year. So if you have a constituent that's at an emergency room and is being told no, or they're being discharged and they're being told no, they call that number, they reach in, we have somebody that will be there. If it's 3 o'clock in the morning, we will jump in and we will try to process that. I manned the phones Christmas Eve of 2022, so 2021, just to make sure, because things were difficult and there were, issues happening. So we make sure that that unit is fully staffed at every level, 24/7, 365 days a year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Last question, Delegate Harrison.
Yeah, thank you. It's just something that, Ms. Quay, that you mentioned just now that prompted the question. Individuals, today was our breast cancer awareness, Susan G. Komen people here today. And, most women, if they're under 40, they're not basically eligible for a mammogram, but let's just say that someone actually is exhibiting some sort of symptoms, but because they're under 40, they're denied a mammogram, but then turns out that they end up with breast cancer. Do you get calls like that as far as claims, individuals saying that, I was not properly treated, and now because I did not receive this treatment, I am here in this space?
Ideally, someone would protest the denial when it happens. The example that you gave, mammograms can be used for diagnostic purposes and also for preventive purposes. And for preventive purposes, there are very strict rules in general about when they're recommended. So that's where age 40 really comes in. But if someone has symptoms and the doctor is saying they need it to diagnose a problem, that should be covered regardless of age. And if not, that falls into that medical necessity bucket where we can look at it and say, this is a service that hasn't, if Maryland has jurisdiction over the policy, which is a whole other issue. But if we have jurisdiction over the health plan and the policy, then we could look at it then and make a determination of whether it's medically necessary for that person to have that diagnostic mammogram.
And then just in your outreach, do you talk about things like that so that individuals know that they have that option?
And so what we try to do is we encourage people, if you think you have been denied or you have questions, bring it to us. And if we don't have jurisdiction, we'll say we don't have jurisdiction over this, but go here. Or we will give you other resources. But we encourage people, don't guess. As I said, insurance is tough. Bring it to us and let us help you figure out what your rights are. And if it's not something that we can help with, let us try to help you figure out who can help.
And just as a last comment, 75% of times when we get involved in those appeals and grievance, those emergency or the medical necessity, there's a reversal. So the consumer gets the coverage that they felt that they needed, and we don't just drop people off. The other day, we were able to get somebody coverage through TRICARE, which is a federal program being administered by a company we don't regulate. But just because we got involved and asked the right questions, that consumer got the coverage they needed within 24 hours. So we are there to help in a multitude of ways. And if we can use our skills or our influence to get to places where we don't have real jurisdiction, my folks do that.
Thank you.
Again, thank you all so much for coming. That concludes this panel. Next up, we have the Office of Attorney General, People's Insurance Council. Okay. Okay, we're good to go. The floor is yours. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby and members of the committee. I am Dorian Malloy. I am the People's Insurance Council. Last legislative session, I was confirmed and approved for that matter after being appointed by former Attorney General Brian Frosch. Thank you for allowing us a few minutes to be able to introduce myself and my colleague, Assistant Attorney General John McClain. John has been with the People's Insurance Division Council for several years now and has been active in the legislative monitoring, review, and advocacy for the People's Insurance Council. And I'm sure that you will see him as well as myself when necessary concerning matters that are of importance to and legislatively mandated for the People's Insurance Council Division of the Attorney General's Office. The People's Insurance Council Division was created by the General Assembly in 2005 to act as a consumer advocate for the Marylanders purchasing homeowners insurance and medical professional liability insurance. We are a small unit consisting of 4 members. Myself, John McClain, the Assistant Attorney General, and an analyst investigator and a management associate are also assigned to the unit. We have 4 primary areas that we concentrate on. We review consumer complaints, we review insurance company rate, rule, and form filings, legislation, and consumer outreach. People's Insurance Council has successfully fulfilled its statutory mandate for years, interacting with Maryland consumers to be of assistance to them both in terms of the complaint process, the administrative hearing process, and in terms of the rate filings and rule filings. The division is legislatively mandated under the State Government Article 6-306 to evaluate each medical professional liability insurance and homeowners insurance matter pending before the Commission to determine whether the interests of insurance consumers are affected. In regards to reaching that goal, we have worked with consumers Each week, we receive from the Maryland Insurance Administration determination letters of the complaints, the formal complaints that were filed by consumers in regards to either homeowners insurance or in regards to medical professional liability. With the pandemic and the movement to remote work environments and more technology availability, we receive those real time. We often receive them the same day that they are issued by email and are able then to interact quickly with Maryland consumers. We provide a letter to them explaining about the People's Insurance Council Division, and we've recently updated that letter and include for them a link and website for the People's Insurance Council Division as well, where we have a number of informative brochures and information that will assist consumers. Oftentimes, consumers will call us to discuss what is the next step in the event that the determination is determined that there was not a violation of Maryland state law. And we assist them in understanding that. First, we make sure that the individual consumer knows that the People's Insurance Council Division cannot be their individual attorney representing them in an individual capacity. However, we can hear from consumers about what are the issues that they are seeing and help guide them to understand what resources are available to them to be able to proceed to the next step. And some of those consumers then make the decision to request an administrative hearing. And that administrative hearing is either held before the Maryland Insurance Administration or initially at the Office of Administrative Hearings, with a final decision being issued by MIA. And those consumers oftentimes, when they first reach us, feel very overwhelmed by what they have gone through. They are overwhelmed with the process. They're overwhelmed with whatever the damage or peril that has occurred to their home. And so really oftentimes the first part of working with those individuals that call us are just listening, letting them know that they're being heard, that we are hearing about what their concerns are in terms of both being able to have their property covered and about how they were treated during that process and how whether they felt that they were being heard by the companies and the claims agents that worked with them. We also try to make sure in those initial phone calls with them that they're aware of other resources that are available to them through other state agencies or other stakeholders. Oftentimes we refer them to the Maryland State Bar Association website so they can look at the lawyer referral program in the event that they had not previously had counsel and are now considering having counsel. Many of the constituents, in fact, continue to be self-represented at the administrative hearing process. And so in assisting them with that, we have on our website information that discusses how an administrative process works, access to Maryland websites for the legislature for access to COMAR and to statutes. We also talk with them about being able to make a Public Information Acts request that allows them to be able to get a copy of the MIA investigative file that is appropriate to be released under that request. And oftentimes that helps them understand better what information MIA considered not only from the consumer, but from the insurance company as well. It is often detailed in that determination letter, but this gives them actual hard copies of some of that conversations or documents that were used. And sometimes that is what the consumer actually just needs to be able to better understand what has occurred with them, and sometimes it is information that they use to be able to prepare for those hearings. In addition, we oftentimes will refer those consumers over to areas that will assist them in terms of if they call us prior to filing a complaint with MIA, have they considered using a public adjuster? And that making sure that they know that they licensing of public adjusters as well. Have they considered going to MIA either for the rapid response program or for the formal complaint if they wish to proceed in that way as well. Also making sure they're aware of state agencies such as DLLR when we have disaster issues occur, severe winter storms, to make sure they're aware of how they can determine someone is licensed to be a contractor and be able to use that database. We have also had a number of listening sessions and informative exchanges with both county agencies, Office of Emergency Management, We had one with Anne Arundel County after the tropical storm Ida in regards to issues that were of concern there as well that would affect homeowners. We also had some sessions with MDE and also learning about the new floodplains maps that were being produced for Maryland to have better, more informative information in regards to that. One example of a complaint that we had received was an individual who had flood damage. Now, he did not have coverage under his homeowners, but he had a really urgent concern in that he had damage to his wellhead. And he could not find in his area someone to help assist him and get that repaired. So he did not have running water to his home. That impacts homeowners insurance in that you have to have a habitable home. And so Mr. McLean and I both took some time to do some research, and we were able to refer him to a state agency that had a list of licensed well drillers so that he could look at other potential individuals to be able to assist him to get that repair done. And so sometimes we do see those issues that come up with being individuals being able to afford and to be able quickly to get either mitigation after there is damage or to be able to get the property repaired so they can get the full replacement cost coverage available to them in a proper time. And so we often partner with stakeholders with information to complainants. And I think what we've seen mostly when we've had things come straight from legislative offices oftentimes is right after an event has occurred. We have reached out both to the state legislature, we have reached out to the federal Congress, and reaching out to local officials as well, so they're aware of People's Insurance Council Division's mission and ability and willingness to help and work with consumers. We have also recently started in-person outreach that has been in Southern Maryland, the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, Prince George's County, and as the year continues on, we will get into all of the counties and into the city. And we've been doing this primary in the library lobbies, where we have an opportunity for individuals to take brochures from us. We have them in Spanish and we have them in English. We also oftentimes have individuals stop by where their issue isn't homeowners, their issue isn't medical professional liability, but as a state employee, we make sure that we try to get them referred to the appropriate place so they can get those questions answered. Is it health insurance? We're going to send them over to MIA or to the Attorney General's Health Education Advocacy Unit. So oftentimes we are sending them to other resources or agencies, but we do not want to leave them feeling turned away, that no one has heard them, and that they are just being passed from agency to agency. And so sometimes in those environments, we've seen things that really do impact Marylanders as a whole. Homelessness. I was at a library lobby event recently when the weather was just starting to turn cold. And at least 2 individuals came up to me and talked to me about, oh, I don't have homeowners insurance right now because I don't have a home. And so talking with them just to make sure that they're aware of resources that are available to them to make sure that they were going to be safe. So in those events, we get to hear about what are the circumstances that led to homelessness and therefore a lack of need either for renters insurance, homeowners insurance, condo or townhouse matters. In addition to that, we also refer them to the court website so that they're aware of the different forms and issues and things that are available to assist them with self-representation. Those are just some of the matters that we do in terms of making sure that they're aware of the resources that are available, not just through the People's Insurance Council Division, the Attorney General, but through all of the state agencies that you will review and help fund and form policy on. In addition to that, the division also reviews insurance company rates, forms, and rule filings made with MIA. Under State Government Article 6-306, it states, if the division finds that a rate increase is excessive, inadequate, or unfairly discriminatory, the division shall appear before the commissioner on behalf of insurance consumers in any hearing on rate filing. Typically, the effect of filings on the consumers is not easily ascertainable without in-depth analysis. So the People's Insurance Council Division does use the services of actuary consulting firms to analyze filings that include reviewing their actual data. And the statute requires us to have those reviews when the rate increase is 10%, more than 10%. Oftentimes, those reviews end up with an opportunity to better understand those filings, but also conversations with the insurance companies, on an occasion corrections of the filings that they have filed with MIA to better understand or to correct their filings in regards to the rate filings. We also have had conversations when need be with MIA about those filings to try to better understand them or to bring issues forward regarding those. In our annual report, we indicated that some of the areas that we have looked at, and are continuing to look at, are areas such as the age of the insured, the marital status of the insured. There was legislation passed that dealt with issues regarding an issue that came to the People's Insurance Council Division's attention a few years ago. Mr. McLean was involved heavily in that matter, in which an individual's spouse died, and she was then listed as an impact that was negative to her in regards to now being a widow. And so legislation was moved forward on that, and it was appreciated. There was a question in regards to territories. And so one of the issues we have asked for our actuary folks to keep an eye out and look at for us, have a better understanding of it, is how rates are used for territories and zip codes. And so one of the things that John McLean noticed in the zip codes is you need to look at all 9 numbers, not just the first 5. That in fact, you could have someone on the same street but have, or city block, but have a slightly different zip code for the last 4, and that may impact the rate filing. And there may be reasons for that, distance of, how far a home is from, the fire hydrant or fire response or police response. But we have started to ask our actuary folks to keep an eye on that, on the rate filings, so that we can have a better understanding of it, so we can formulate what, if any, impact that may have. And that is an ongoing project. In addition to that, we do come down and monitor and view and work with legislatures in regards to legislation that is before the committee. And we also, when the tropical storm Ida happened, we engaged in a teletown hall along with Joy Hatchett and a number of other stakeholders from Anne Arundel County, and with Senator Elthworth and delegates Henson, Howard, and Jones, to be able to answer questions and provide real-time information when folks were impacted by that storm, and to be able to provide them with resource information at that time. And we are willing to do that with any of you if you make that request of us to be able to further assist folks. In addition, as a result of some of those contacts, we have developed a strong relationship with MIA. Associate Commissioner Robert Barron is the Property and Casualty Associate Commissioner, and so we have had numerous conversations with him that have led into some real positive information sharing and changes. One of those changes that occurred was that the Maryland Insurance Administration files its annual report with you, and one of the appendixes that they have that deals with the number of complaints contain data. And so when we asked him about some of that data information, when we were doing a review that we thought would assist us in understanding the number of complaints against insurance companies or insurance groups, and if there seemed to be any impact by one particular insurance company versus another, we had some questions about how that data was being reported. And as a result of that, we noticed in this last FY22 that in fact there had been some clarifications in the way that data is reported. It makes it easier for consumers to understand, and we appreciate that effort that was made and having heard our concerns. In addition, we had worked with MIA and Maryland Department of Environment as well, which resulted in the MIA issuing a consumer advisory concerning piers, wharfs, bulkheads as a result of those storms. And what happened after Tropical Storm Ida is that number of consumers had lost or had damaged property, and it was not covered under their homeowners, and they were surprised. They did not understand that that was not going to be covered. And oftentimes the flood insurance does not cover that. And so the People's Insurance Council Division felt that they had a stake in that it is important to maintain the integrity of the property, the stability of the ground, and make sure it doesn't impact their ability to keep and maintain their homeowners insurance. As a result of a number of collaborative meetings, in fact, consumer advisory was issued by MIA to inform consumers about the concerns and gaps in coverage for that insurance as well. In addition, we also had brought up during the course of those meetings that we were starting to see that virtual currency, or cryptocurrency as it is sometimes called, were now being listed as exclusions in homeowner coverage. And so many of consumers have now gone into the cryptocurrency market, or maybe not, in light of recent events. So there are concerns in that area, and we wanted to make sure that folks were aware that that might be an exclusionary matter under their homeowners coverage concerning how they dealt with that particular issue. In addition to that, and Joy Hatchett was the person from MIA that dealt with us and worked with us on a number of those issues. In regards to other issues we're seeing, we are keeping a close eye and continuing to inform ourselves about climate change. Climate change is noted nationally, internationally, that in fact the number and severity of storms has increased. And with that increase of storms and severity of the storms, it directly impacts homeowners, the damage that occurs to them, and what has occurred. And so we have been looking at those issues and also trying to help during the times that we're in outreach, have folks understand better what those impacts are. If they're going to be doing, having to repair damage, wanting to make sure that they're aware of resources that are available that may be climate friendly and also sustainable in terms of their homes. So some of the other issues we see are premium increase. So we've seen a number of issues or complaints arise because during, unfortunately, this time where we have had higher inflation, many of the insurance companies have what's called an inflationary guard, is one of the terms that is used, where there's an automatic ability to increase the premium rates at the appropriate times because of the increase in inflation. And also because of the replacement cost for building materials, what happens is that risk to the insurance company as to what they may have to pay when they have a replacement cost insurance company has increased as well, and in fact, premiums. So oftentimes when an individual gets a Maryland Insurance Administration's determination letter, and it talks about the reasons why their premium increased from the last time to now, we will see such things that talk about the rate that has been filed. So in conversations with MIA, we asked them, and they graciously agreed to do this, was to include the CERF filing number. CERF is where the insurance company files their insurance rates electronically. And so when consumers call us now, they have that filing number that will help them to be able to actually see that filing. On MIA's website, there is a public availability for them to be able to look at that filing for what is publicly available. And so that helps both the insured understand what has happened with their increase in policy, but also be able to go back to the data. And so that has been helpful as well. Also, we tend to see with individuals, obviously with storms, issues that come up about roof and siding, and many folks have not purchased or weren't really aware that potentially what they are going to have covered is what is actually damaged and not a match. So we often have conversations with them about that, and also that's one of the good things about when we're out in the community and we're having first contact rather than post-complaint, is that when they come to us about some of these issues, we are able to say, have you pulled out your policy? Have you looked at your declaration? Do you understand what's there? Have you looked at what are the potential additional endorsements that are available to you so that when the time comes, you know what your coverage is? And so also when we're helping them through the administrative hearing, we're asking them to, again, be able to look at what did their policy actually cover. We also are able to refer them over to the law and try to explain to them, and oftentimes we provide them with a copy of, court appellate rulings that deal with the standard of arbitrary and capricious, because many consumers do not have any idea what that means. So I will send them over a copy of the Berkshire case as well, so that they can look at that information and make a good determination. Do they want to continue to proceed with the administrative process? And if they do, what is it their burden is? What we do oftentimes hear about is a frustration with not having access to the insurance company's inspection reports, and therefore not understanding, my contractor came out and said this needed to happen, and the insurance company contractor or inspector came out and said something else. And so there's some frustration sometimes with that. A recent call I had, a frustration that happened was there was sort of an initial feeling from the first person that they talked to from the insurance company that they would have coverage. When they started to push back about the fact that maybe the damage was more extensive, maybe that more coverage should be provided, or the claim should be provided in other ways, well, then the inspector from the insurance company comes out, and then they find out they're not going to have coverage at all. And so that's very disconcerting from them. And I'm not saying that the insurance company necessarily in that particular instance was right or wrong in that idea, or in their basis for claiming that they did not have coverage. But what I was trying to highlight with this, sometimes they are wrong, right? And sometimes they're not, is that the consumers become very overwhelmed, frustrated, feel like they aren't getting good information, or that, that the system is just against them because of this lack of understanding of the process. And then when they do go to sometimes try to get what they feel is the full benefit of their claim, that they find that their claim is denied. So those are a number of the areas that we see that occur with them. We can help walk them through some of those areas and get them to the appropriate resources, and be able to assist them in that way. So I hope that this has helped you in understanding the things that People's Insurance Council Division is doing, not just only in terms of the review of complaints and in terms of the rate filings, but also being out in the community. And we are available to come out and speak with your constituents about these issues, and it's really great for us to hear from them. You also asked about discrimination. So we have had individuals indicate to us that they feel that they have been discriminated against. And so I feel that Commissioner Bahrain did a wonderful job of sort of talking about that various and different issues. But sometimes what we hear about is the interaction with the insurance employees and the perception by the homeowner that they are being discriminated against by the manner in which they are being interacted with. Not necessarily any direct statement that all of us would easily recognize and agree would be completely inappropriate and discriminatory, but in the way in which that is handled. And so MIA does have a process available to be, when appropriate, to refer complaints that are with the Commission on Civil Rights. And so we did have a recent case with an individual that has talked to us about his concerns about feeling he's being treated in a discriminatory manner because of his interaction with the insurance company. And we have talked with MIA and worked out an issue going forward that when those complaints are referred over, that in fact we are given notification of those, so we can have a better understanding when it goes to another state agency how that's handled. And sometimes the issues are a little bit different, whether it's before Commission on Civil Rights or it's before the Maryland Insurance Administration or homeowners, but it's within the homeowners context. So, sort of anticipating from listening to the earlier presentation what some of those questions may have been, those are some of the things that we are seeing. Thank you very much for your time, and the People's Insurance Council Division looks forward to working with each and every one of you and would be glad to answer any questions or provide you with further information either today or follow up.
Ms. Malloy, thank you so much, and I want to thank you for all the work your office does on behalf of Maryland. It really does make a difference. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. We'll go to our final panel, and it's the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, better known as MAIF, and we'll welcome Director Redmer, Chief Operating Officer David Pfeiffer, and Sandy Dotson.
Mr. Vice Chair, there's a flash drive here that might have been from MIA's presentation. It's not, it's okay.
Mr. Vice Chair, or Mr. Chair, how are you?
Good,
Members of the
yourself?
committee, good to see everybody. While we're getting set up, I will reintroduce Dave Pfeiffer, our COO. Sandy Dodson is our Government Relations Manager, and sitting in the gallery here is Dennis Carroll, who a lot of you know. We have the pleasure of having him as counsel. He is retired from an extraordinary career in both the public and private sector, having been a Deputy Insurance Commissioner and General Counsel to Chesapeake Employers. I am not going to read what you're going to see. I'll touch on a few highlights, and hopefully, based on the amount of time you have already been here, try to get through this relatively briefly. Each of you got a press release from us today highlighting our 50th anniversary. So we were created by state government 50 years ago. And our primary function for our insured division is to provide automobile policies to residents and businesses. And it's important to note, unlike Chesapeake, as an example, who's an insurer of last resort, we can't provide insurance to just anybody. We can only provide insurance to folks that have been turned down by 2 carriers or canceled by their existing carrier. I also highlight that we operate just like a regular old auto insurance company. We don't receive any government funds. We operate on premiums. So we collect premiums. We invest them like other insurance carriers and pay our expenses out of that. It's important to note that the legislature created for us an assessment mechanism. So we are required by law to keep a surplus on hand for policyholder premiums. If our surplus drops below a certain amount, then the state does an assessment, which basically they send a bill to all of the insurance carriers to collect money on our behalf, and then ultimately your consumers would pay for that through either increased premiums or a line item assessment on their own bill. At this point, Maryland Auto has not done an assessment in the last 30 years. Again, we operate just like any other insurance company. So if you look at our organizational chart, you'll see about 180 professional insurance employees. Again, claim adjusters, underwriters, attorneys, insurance accountants, etc. We are not represented by the Attorney General's office as an independent state agency. We have a general counsel that serves both Maryland Auto as a business and our board of trustees. We have in-house lawyers, and then we outsource legal work for claims-related matters as well. And the executive director is appointed by and serves at the pleasure of the board of trustees. As other insurance carriers, we are regulated by the Maryland Insurance Administration in a way that's very similar to the other insurance companies doing business. So we have financial examinations. The MIA can do a market conduct exam. We have to send them our rate filings, etc. Unlike other state agencies, we have an internal auditor. So the intern, think kind of like an inspector general, if you will. Our internal auditor conducts compliance and fiscal audits, and the internal audit reports functionally to the Board of Trustees, and then administratively reports to me. So as an example, when the audit committee of the board has a meeting, the last 15 minutes, all of the employees are excused except for the internal auditor to have a private interview with the board. Additionally, we also contract with an external auditor. So every year we go through a very detailed audit from Johnson and Lambert, a very well-known external auditor. I mentioned oversight is provided by the Board of Trustees. You can see here that 9 members appointed by the governor, and I can assure you we have a very active, engaged, and diverse Board of Trustees. The board has multiple committees, including a financial management committee, oversight of the finances of the company. I mentioned our audit committee, communications, government relations, a risk assessment committee, and then, as most organizations, an executive committee. We are to provide automobile insurance to Maryland citizens that cannot get it. So eligibility requirements are very limited. You need a valid driver's license, and again, you have to be, or registration, and had trouble getting insurance in the private market. We rate premiums similar to other carriers, but I will highlight the fact that we do not use credit, we do not use current employment, and we do not use education in the rating of premiums. You'll also note that a significant percentage of our policyholders reside in either Baltimore metropolitan area or the DC metropolitan area. We do not provide insurance directly to the consumer. All of our insurance are provided by the independent insurance producers that are your constituents. So any licensed producer can do business with Maryland Auto. We do business with over 1,400 scattered around the state. And like other insurance carriers, we do pay a commission, and that amount is in statute. The insurance policies that we provide to your constituents are very similar to those that you have with your own personal insurance policy. And then let me talk a little bit about the results. And in addition to providing insurance to folks that can't get it anywhere else, you'll note that one of our missions in statute is to look at affordability as an issue. So, you know, our role is to take folks that are either uninsured or going to be uninsured and provide them with coverage so that they have the coverage that they need. And you can imagine in many families and in many communities, affordability is a key area, key component. Because this stuff obviously is not cheap. You pay for it, and so that's a key component. With respect to affordability, we have a self-imposed affordability cap that we use. So we look at all of the communities where we provide coverage. That's every zip code in the state. We look at the median income in those areas, and we try to keep insurance premiums to no more than 2.5% of the median income in those communities. So if you are in an affluent area, that really makes no difference at all. You're going to pay whatever the going rate is based on the kind of car you drive, your age, driving record, etc. However, if you are in a low-income community, you're probably not going to pay the full load. Now, historically, we have priced our product to lose about 20%. So for every dollar we collect, we pay out $1.20 in claims and operating expenses. Now, when we did our review in the fall, because we normally do a rate change in the fall, the rate indication was statewide that we would need to raise rates 27% to break even. And in some of these low-income communities around the state, the number was as high as 44%. Now, the one thing that we know is we cannot raise rates in poor communities 44%, because that just defeats the whole purpose. We take folks that want to be insured and they become uninsured. So these are significant problems that we're dealing with that we will address throughout the session. But you can see on this slide our financial results, and you can see that projected for 2022 is our surplus dropped from 52 million to 25 million. Now that is because of these unsustainable losses that we have incurred, but it's also due to a poor performance in the stock market in 2022. But nonetheless, 52 million to 25 million. For comparison purposes, the assessment trigger that I mentioned previously is around 14 million. Also, I would point out that you can see the policies in force, the lower right-hand corner. So let's go back, if you will, to 2020. I arrived at Maryland Auto in May of 2020. And if you remember back then, the pandemic hit. We were shut down. Folks weren't driving. And naturally, if you're not driving, you're not out hitting things. So the insurance carriers around the state, they weren't paying out a lot in claims because people weren't driving, they weren't hitting things. You go to the end of 2020, these insurance companies were flush with cash. They collected premiums, they didn't pay out a lot of claims, they had a lot of cash. And as you know, business 101 is if you have a lot of cash, you have to do something with it. You have to deploy that capital. And many of the standard insurance carriers decided to deploy that capital by taking market share in Maryland. So what we saw was insurance companies reducing premiums. They were liberalizing their underwriting. They were writing folks in 2021 and early 22 that they would not have taken probably a couple of years before. Well, when you lower your premiums and you liberalize your underwriting, you end up starting to pay those claims. Now, just Google car insurance rates in America, not even Maryland, but in America, and the rate increases have been significant around the country, including Maryland. These same carriers are now tightening their underwriting, and they're more selective than they were before. So if you look at the policies in force, you can see each month a deterioration of the amount of folks with us as the carriers were out trying to write a lot of business. Then as their fortunes changed and they tightened those underwriting standards, more of that business now is coming to Maryland Auto, not because of anything we did, but because the standard market has been a little bit more selective than they were in the past. So that is the insured division. Very briefly, we also have an uninsured division. Now, here we do a crossover. Now we're working with state budget dollars. The uninsured division was set up, I think, in the 1950s. And what we do is we pay claims on behalf of the state of Maryland for Maryland citizens that are injured by an uninsured driver but have no insurance themselves. So if any one of you are hit by an uninsured driver and you have car insurance, your car insurance carrier are going to pay those claims. If you don't have insurance yourself, then you're stuck. So in those circumstances, somebody's injured by an uninsured driver, they have no collectible insurance, we step in on behalf of the state, we pay those claims on behalf of your constituents, and then we go after the uninsured driver in hopes of gaining a recovery. So we pay claims on behalf of the state. We're also responsible to conduct outreach, incentivize, educate, and encourage those uninsured drivers to become insured drivers. We receive a part of state budget money for that. It was a little over $4 million last year. Because of increased claims, et cetera, our current surplus there is just under $2 million. And we make reference to the Insurance Reference Council, I'm sorry, I'm trying to rush. The Insurance Research Council projects the Maryland uninsured rate of about 14.1%. So when you go down 97 and you see somebody passing you doing 80 or 90 miles an hour, 1 out of 8 of those vehicles are uninsured. And with that briefing, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions.
We are very thankful for that.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, you've sat on this side, so you know. I do not see any questions. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm sure
Appreciate
that
your
this
time.
topic will be
It will.
front and center soon enough.
Yeah, thank you.
So, but again, thank you all for coming and all you do. I want to thank the committee members today, and I'll see you on the floor tomorrow. That concludes today's hearings.